Join host Charisma Eve on a journey of self-discovery, empowerment, and unapologetic authenticity. In each episode, Charisma dives deep into conversations, exploring what it truly means to embrace oneself fully and live life with genuine charisma. From personal antidotes to interviews, Unapologetically Me is a space where vulnerability meets strength, where listeners are encouraged to celebrate their uniqueness and step into their power without reservation. Tune in for inspiring stories, practical tips, and a dose of unfiltered wisdom as Charisma Eve guides you towards embracing your most authentic self. It's time to own your truth and live unapologetically. And now your host, Charisma Eve.
And hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We have missed you for maybe a few days, but that's all right. It only makes you grow fonder. What did they say? Absence makes the heart grow fonder, right? So we welcome you to Unapologetically Me, Charisma Eve. Thank you for coming to see us today. And we have with us today a wonderful, wonderful sister of mine. She is absolutely incredible. I think that we haven't had a queen in a couple of weeks, so this is a way to welcome the sisters back to the platform. And I'd like to welcome to you my friend, Miss Sandra Thomas. She is absolutely amazing. She is a motivational speaker. She is the founder of the Soul Network, and that acronym stands for Seniors of Urban Living. Let me tell you a little bit about this sister. I had an opportunity a couple of years ago to work with her, where she does do a lot of advocating for the senior citizens, and she goes and she does work for getting them help. As far as one thing that I do know, she does trying to get help with getting them, I would say, more visible in the talking about them being more visible in the nursing home area. And I had an opportunity to work with her a couple of years ago prior to my father passing away. And she is, if I'm not mistaken, still working on trying to get cameras in the nursing home areas. And that's something that is very, very necessary and very needed. So she's a busy lady. She's working on obtaining her master's. I do know that. And today she's going to talk to us about childhood trauma. So like I said, she's also a motivational speaker, but she talks, she's, very busy. And she's going to talk to us today about childhood trauma. So Sandra, welcome to Unapologetically Me, Charisma Eve. I'm so glad to have you. Thank you for coming and visiting us and talking to us about your platform, and just share a little bit about what it is that you are, working with as far as childhood trauma, and anything else that you might feel like you need to kind of put out there. With childhood trauma, I do want to say I've noticed a lot of missing children within the last few months, and so I just wanted to toss that out there, and I thought maybe that might kind of fit within what you're going to talk about today. So welcome, Miss Sandra Thomas, to Unapologetically Me, and go ahead and talk to us about what it is that you want to tell us about, that we can be of some help with your platform.
Well, thank you so much, Andrea, for having me here on tonight. I am currently a Master of Social Work student, and I just I'm going to be finalizing my internship with the Mecklenburg County DSS Guardianship Division. And what that division does is there are many of adults that have suffered from health trauma. And because of that health trauma, they can no longer make decisions. So the courts are petitioned to appoint a guardian, and that guardian then would be responsible for every aspect of their life. So it's been very rewarding. A couple of years ago, I started Soul Network Seniors of Urban Living, and we provide educational and health resources for the senior population in the state of North Carolina, as well as we really care about the well-being, the social well-being of our seniors as well. So as it relates to childhood trauma, the one thing that we find in the Black community, I'll say maybe about 15 years ago, there was a survey that was done in the urban community to take a look at how some of the mental health disorders that many African Americans face, what were they related to? And so this survey showed that nearly 90% of African Americans had suffered from some sort of trauma. That's
Hmm.
a high number, very
That
high number.
is very high.
And trauma can look many different ways.
Hmm.
There is health, there's community and violent trauma, there's physical trauma, whether it be of a sexual nature or of a violent battery nature. Um, Trauma looks different. So the one thing that we also have found is in children that have suffered from these various types of trauma that they exhibit certain inability. And a lot of those inabilities can range from cognition, lack of
Mm.
memory. A lot of them have difficulty sleeping. A lot of them have difficulty performing in school. And that's why you find a lot of students, one minute they may be doing well in school, and then the next minute their grades are dropping, and you're wondering why. Something traumatic
Okay.
has happened to them. And a
Hmm.
lot of times, parents are just not aware and they're not educated on knowing the signs when they're
Hmm.
there. They can be right there in front of them, and they just don't recognize it.
Wow.
I think we need to really, we've come a long way, excuse me, in terms of mental health disorders in the Black community, but a lot
Hmm.
of people are not accepting it for what it is. And
Hmm.
even those that do accept it, they're not seeking out the necessary treatment. They would rather pick up the phone and call their girlfriend and talk about it. You can't do that. You have to talk to a
Hmm.
professional that will um, that will use evidence-based practice intervention. These evidence-based practice interventions have been researched, they have been studied, tried, and they're
Right.
true. So again, we've come a long way, but we got a long way to go.
Hmm. And in terms of how far, okay, so before I say that, let me say this. So I have family members that has diagnosed with being borderline retarded. And when they were diagnosed with being borderline retarded, because that word has been misunderstood, and people saw that and related it to, let's say, when they were um, when they were stated to have been borderline retarded, they thought they were Down syndrome. They saw them as being Down syndrome. And these were proud people. These were family members, and they were very proud people. So they thought that once they had been down, related as being, not related, but once they had been um, diagnosed as being borderline retarded at in the ninth grade, that, oh my God, she's going to be slobbering on herself, or she's going to be urinating on herself, or different things of that nature. She was embarrassed. This is not my child. This was the nature that she took on. So instead of seeking out help, she automatically took the wrong mentality and just said, this is not my child. Nothing is wrong with my child. And of course, this was somebody that went to church, and she just said, we're just going to pray about it. Speak on what she could have done differently, because what happened with that individual, she didn't get treatment for her. That was a long, long time ago. She didn't get treatment for her. And as a result of that, her children suffered from childhood trauma. And now they have a lot of things going on with them. They're adults now, but now one child is schizophrenic, bipolar, another child suffers from anger management. They have a lot of trauma going on in their lives with their children. What could they have done differently that could have made better choices and could have better results?
Well, first, let me address something. We don't refer to individuals as retarded anymore. They
Okay.
are developmentally disabled. So when you're talking about a child that is autistic, or what was the other predisposition you said the child had? You said autistic, and it was another illness that you said other than the cognitive. When you're talking about developmental disabilities,
Uh-huh.
that is sometimes can be a genetic predisposition. So when you're dealing with that, that can be traumatic to parents,
Mm-hmm.
but the type of trauma that we are talking about today is cognitive
Okay.
trauma, how traumatic events affect a child psychologically. Because when you talk about developmental disability, that also has a physiological effect on an individual.
I
So
see.
that means lack of mobility, lack of being able to use their extremities. They may need assistance with their activities of daily living, that's toileting, dressing, bathing. So what we're talking about today is a cognitive disability that
Mm-hmm.
then leaps over into mental health disorder. So as far as it relates to the family member that you said had schizophrenia, or maybe bipolar, or even manic depressive, or just suffering from depression, it depends on what caused that mental health disorder. So mental health disorders can also have a genetic predisposition. So what I mean by that is, if someone's mom suffered from depression, she gives birth to a child, genetically that child can grow up exhibiting depression. A teenager,
Mm-hmm.
adolescent stage, experiences a traumatic event such as sexual abuse or physical abuse that could then turn into depression. Because imagine if that child is warned, or uh, her perpetrator puts fear in her not to tell, and imagine them suppressing that for so many years. It leads to
Okay.
depression. It leads to sexual promiscuity. It leads to young boys that have been sexually abused, it leads to them entering into the criminal justice system. And that's
Uh-huh.
why you find recidivism so high in our jails across the country, because a lot of our young men and our young women, they have suffered some form of traumatic
Hmm.
event in their lives.
Right. And see,
So,
so I'm
and
I'm glad that you talked about that point, because the family member that she had been diagnosed as borderline retarded in the ninth grade in school. Okay. So what happened was, she after she dropped out of school in the ninth grade, dropped out of school, and then she had the children that ended up being schizophrenic. She had the children that ended up having these disorders and things. You see what I mean? Am I make? I'm not sure if
I
I'm
can't
making
really
myself.
attest to that particular example, but I can say to you that when it comes to the developmentally disabled,
Uh huh.
that most often is a genetic predisposition. So
I don't. I guess
it's
I'm not making myself clear. I think what it was is that the so it was my sister, right? So years ago in the 80s, before a lot of the terms and things became clear, and the understanding of trauma and disorders and things became clear. My mother did not understand what trauma and all of that meant. So my sister started to show a lot of these different behaviors and things in school. Okay. And then she was diagnosed as being borderline retarded. And my mother didn't understand what that meant. And it wasn't explained to her properly. So once it wasn't explained to her properly, in her mind, she began to take on different types of understanding. And she didn't understand, basically. See, as you're explaining to me now, the way you're explaining it to me now, it wasn't explained to her then. And by that
and
time,
also too that when you're looking at the developmentally disabled and going through an assessment, um, developmental disabilities also relate to an individual's IQ as well. You can have an autistic child that has a very high IQ, and
and
then you
she
can
did.
have some autistic children who do not have. So again, depending on the type of developmental disability that she had, and I don't know what the diagnosis was. I don't know what type of assessment was administered. I can't speak to that. I can only speak in general terms. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, mainly that can be considered trauma to give birth to
Mm-hmm.
a child with any type of disability can definitely be traumatic to a mother, you
Right.
know, and depending on how it affects that child as they're going through the aging process, yes, that can be traumatic. Definitely. That's one of the health traumas that exist as far as the various types of trauma. But I can say to you that in the Black community, the types of trauma that are prevalent in our communities is community trauma. Look at COVID. COVID was a very traumatic time for everybody because many people lost loved ones. And
Mm-hmm.
what did that do? Because we had to stay in. We couldn't go anywhere. That became very
Right.
depressing to
Mm.
some people. Very
Right.
depressing. Set in at astronomical numbers
Mm-hmm.
of how community trauma can be very effective on a community. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you also have to look at physical violence. Domestic violence is through the roof, and the numbers are not decreasing; they're increasing. People are under pressure. People are suicidal. People don't know where to go. Some people are they're embarrassed to talk about their feelings. Some
Mm-hmm.
people don't feel comfortable with talking to a friend. because when you call a friend, they have problems. And
Mhm.
nobody wants to go and see the therapist in the Black community. I'm not going to say everybody, but a large number of African Americans, they kind of
Mhm.
shy away from therapy and they don't understand how beneficial it can be because you're sitting and you're talking to someone that is objective, they're not biased, and they're not judgmental. They're there to
Mhm.
listen. Sometimes just by talking it out, and you got another pair of ears to listen, sometimes you can figure things out for yourself. So then you got sexual abuse. So many of our children So many of our children are being subjected to sexual abuse by
Yes.
family, close family members, close friends, people in the church, in the religious community. And then you also have people that you trust in communities, after school programs, organized sports teams. They prey on
Mhm.
little children. And
That's
so
right.
it's important for us to educate our children when they're small, and it's
Mhm.
okay to teach your child what is inappropriate, what is okay for somebody to do. I don't care if it's auntie, uncle, or whoever. That is important. And then even when we look at domestic violence, that is very traumatic. Domestic
Mhm.
violence numbers are in the 70th percentile in the African American community, and that's a very large number. And a lot of women that have been subjected to this domestic violence, their self-esteem is low. They feel like that this particular individual, and this exists in the LGBT community as well. So you got same with domestic violence as well. So people are in despair. They feel like they have nobody to turn to, and so that's why you find so many women that stay in these relationships year after
Mhm.
year after year because the trauma has affected them to the point that it has been normalized in their lives.
Mhm.
It then becomes normal. They then begin to feel like that they deserve it, that this was the cards that were dealt to them, you know.
Mhm.
And a lot of women that are subjected to domestic violence, they went through traumatic experiences when they were young.
Mm. Wow. That's amazing. That so do you do you see where we made any strides as far as growth from maybe say the 80s up until now in the African American community specifically, where we made any growth, any
I would
have we
say
made any
yes,
growth?
yes, we
Good.
have. Long way to go what we have. And you know what I think that relates to? I think that relates to we have more African Americans in our society today that are pursuing in the field of psychology, in the field of therapy, and mental health counseling. And so because of that, you know, our like-minded individuals, our people we can see, okay, well, she's pursuing this career, so if she tells me that maybe I can get some help from a counselor, they're going to listen. So I think that that has a lot to do with it, and just educating the community more in which
Hmm.
you live. And I always say, you know, um, instead of talking to your girlfriend about your problem or having your girlfriend call you to talk to you about your problem, if she is not a professional, she could
Right.
actually do more harm than good because
That's
she
right.
does not have the ability to be objective.
That's
And
right.
that is the key, is being objective. So the one thing that we can do as a people is when your friends call and they have a problem and you see that it could be pretty severe and out of your scope, please don't try to be the therapist. You can do your
Hmm.
friend a favor by going to psychologytoday.com and finding a professional counselor that have went through the training and can actually provide the best evidence-based intervention.
That's right. That's right. And I'm so glad you made that statement because if you're not a doctor, then don't try to give a diagnosis. You know what I mean? I mean,
Well, keep
sometimes
this
I
in mind.
have,
Let me correct you on something. They don't have to be a
okay,
doctor as long as they are licensed in whatever state they're in to practice. So
okay,
when you talk about social workers, when you talk, you got two types of social workers. You got master social workers, but you also have clinical. So when you talk about clinical social workers, those are the social workers that have been trained. They know what type of assessment to administer in order to diagnose anything. They're very well versed in the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic Manual for Mental Health Disorder. So you got to make sure you get that. They don't have to be a doctor, a
okay,
psychiatrist. Psychiatrists, they do diagnose, but they are also able to prescribe medications. Social workers, uh, mental health counselors, psychologists, they don't administer medication. Some do, some psychologists do. So you just have to know um, which professionals are able to do what. Social workers provide therapy. Social workers don't administer medicine. Mental health counselors and also psychologists. So
hmm.
again, you don't have to be a doctor.
And, you know, it's just so much meat on that bone to to go, you know, to speak further into just thinking, listening to you, and then my thoughts are going further into talking about thinking about conversation that I had with Gerald McGee, and he's a clinical therapist. You know, and so I understand perfectly what you're saying. You know, but you know how sometimes you can be talking with someone, and some people can kind of get full of themselves and go overboard. I've got friends that if you talk to them, they can go overboard, but um, you kind of got to know where to cut them off at, because they'll get they'll get a little full of themselves. So just knowing where to stop at, and that sometimes that's a hard place to tell them, well, maybe I need to find a therapist, or I need to find a psychiatrist or a psychologist, or whatever the term might be. But it's just good to know that there are those people out there, and it's good to know that we are at a place now, especially as a people, that we are at a place that we're willing to accept help. I'm so glad that we are at a place that we're willing to accept help, because at one point we weren't there. We weren't there. I can honestly say that. But I'm gonna, you know, it's unfortunately we're gonna have to go. But I am looking to, you know, we're just getting started, and on down the road, hopefully I can invite you to come back, and
I'd
hopefully
love to come back. I would love
I
to
will.
come back.
I will.
Okay.
Okay.
If there's an individual that know that they have been abused as a child, any form of trauma that has been inflicted on them, and they're suffering from some form of mental health disorder, undiagnosed substance abuse or alcohol abuse disorder, they are sexually promiscuous, they have the inability to attain and maintain relationships, they jump from job to job. My suggestion is you don't have to tell anybody. Don't be ashamed. There's nothing to be ashamed of.
That's right.
Don't care. Don't. You shouldn't care about what anybody thinks, because you were a child and you didn't deserve it.
That's right. Thank you. And you are so right, because we have all had some form of we've all at some point been at a place where we've needed to talk to somebody. And that somebody could have been somebody like you. And I'm so glad that we've had you here at Unapologetically Me, Charisma Eve. And we're going to welcome you to come back on our at some time later on our video show, where we're going to have a video and an audio show. So we're just glad that you were able to come and be with us this evening. Miss Sandra Thomas, we thank you for coming to talk with us this evening. And we're very appreciative about the information that you've provided us with. And we hope that somebody out there has been able to gather some information and been informed to where that they can, if they need to find help, they can go and find help. So with that being said, we're going to say good evening, good day, wherever you're listening, whatever part of the day you're listening on. We're just going to say love yourself most of all, because you are the only you that you have. And that is important in and of itself. I love you. God loves you. And we're going to say you guys have a good day. All right? God bless.
Thank you for joining Unapologetically Me, Charisma Eve. Please like, share, and subscribe, and join us every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time for another exciting episode wherever you listen to your podcast.